Okay, Jet fans, Darrell Revis.
Is off the board.
The New York Jets select
Mekhi Becton, Louisville.
Fired up to be a New York Jet.
Pressure just makes you go all the more. I kind of like pressure a little bit.
The New York Jets select.
Welcome to another episode of NFL Draft Preview presented by Verizon with the Athletics' Dane Brugler. We have no time to waste here. Dane is in the thick of the beast. It is in the editing process, so let's dive right into the interior of the offensive line, which is the position that we will be breaking down today. It starts with Alijah Vera-Tucker out of USC. He might not be on the board by the time the Jets are on the clock at 23, but why is he the top option in terms of the interior?
Yeah, if he's there at 23, I think you're feeling really good. If you're Joe Douglas and the Jets decision makers, that's an easy choice. Plug him in at guard. I think he's the top guard in this class. He put himself on the map in 2019 when he played left guard. This past year, he moves to left tackle, replaces Austin Jackson, who was a first-round pick of the Dolphins last year, and he played really well outside. Very coordinated in pass protection, stays patient. He's very under control with his pass sets, stays square to rushers. And I really like his strike timing. He just has a real knack for it. Physical hands, can maintain that spacing between him and rushers. He can re-anchor on the move, looks comfortable pulling, engaging with linebackers at the second level. Came in with only 32-inch hands or 32-inch arms, which I think that right there, it would make him tough. It would make it tough for him to survive a tackle. That's part of the reason why I think he's best inside at guard. But he looks like a plug-and-play starter, a guy that's going to play for a long time.
So if let's just say he's not on the clock when the Jets are at 23, let's say that, would you say he goes somewhere obviously between 2 and 23? And I have a follow-up here, but where would you suggest or where would you project his, potential selection? Like, is he a teens pick? Is he maybe a top 10, closer to 10, or is he more closer to the teens?
I think somewhere in the teens, that mid-first round range. I think it's just a very high floor prospect. Like, you have a good idea of what you're getting with Alijah Vera-Tucker. And most teams that I've talked to see him as a guard. Some think that he could play outside, but most see his best fit inside a guard where you can kind of maximize his strengths as a player. But if he gets out of the top 20, if you're Joe Douglas, you're kind of crossing your fingers that he gets past 21, 22 and gets to you, because he's a mid-first round pick all day.
All right, so that leads me to my next question, Dane, which is, at what point, if you're Joe Douglas, does Alijah Vera-Tucker, let's say he's on the board and you're like, you know what, we have the draft capital that we can make a move and get up and get this guy. At what point does that become a conversation in your eyes?
Once you get to that late teens, when you're only moving up, you're talking about 5 spots. You're not moving up 10, 12 spots. You're moving up 5 spots. That's where I think it's worth talking about. And, you look at some of the teams that are picking there and, maybe guys or teams that might be looking to move back. It's worth having the conversation and see if what the asking price is. Is it one of those third round picks? Is it, a third next year? Could you get away with a fourth and a fifth or something like that? Can you get creative with it? It's always worth making those phone calls to see what your options are. And, there might be more than one player. Maybe a Greg Newsome, who we've talked about, corner from Northwestern. Maybe some of these other – there are going to be players that are still going to be available, pick 17, pick 18, that could really be of some interest to the Jets. So making those calls, laying the groundwork for what it's going to take to move up, it's always worth doing that due diligence.
All right, so let's assume that Vera-Tucker is off the board when the Jets are on the clock at 23. Someone who might be available, Jalen Mayfield out of Michigan. What makes him a good interior prospect, given that most of his starts actually come at tackle for the Wolverines?
Yeah, and there's a lot of split opinions on Mayfield around the league. Some think late first is a possibility. Others have early third-round grades on him. So there's a wide variance here. 6'5", 326 pounds. Like you mentioned, only played right tackle at Michigan, but with his size, his power, his average length, I think his skill set is much better inside. He can uproot defenders at contact. Love the way he'll drive in the run game, inline power, can collapse down so he can create that run room. Slide quickness is average, which is one of the reasons why I think a move inside would be best. Still only 20 years old. He's a very young player. And so I think there will be rough patches early on, and that's where it depends what you're looking for. If you can endure those rough patches early on, then you're going to maybe value Jalen Mayfield a little bit higher. But if you're looking for a plug-and-play guy, maybe he's not for you. So long-term, a really intriguing player can be a solid pro. Short-term, there'd be a learning curve. So there's a lot to like about Jalen Mayfield, but there's certainly split opinion throughout the league.
For Mayfield, I think my assumption that he played right tackle, you're talking about him as an interior prospect. My mind says, well, maybe he'd be a right guard because of some of the sets would be similar, but do you think that he could play left guard too? Or in your mind, you're like, it makes more sense for him just to stay on the right side of the ball and play right guard?
Probably where he's most comfortable, but I think that's why pro days matter, to see how he can move around doing. When they do these agility drills, they'll do them from different angles, doing them from different sides, just to see how he moves. Is he a little tight in one direction or the other? So that's something that the coaches would get a firsthand look at when they are at the pro day, or they're able to watch the tape at the pro day and get a better feel for that. So I think it's fair to assume right guard might be where he's most comfortable. But the way he can move, I think that either guard spot is certainly in the realm of possibility for him.
This might be an unfair question, but you asked about Mayfield's, or you said about how Mayfield's a bit of a project. Let's assume that he goes to a great situation and he hits what maybe someone may describe as his ceiling. What is his ceiling, let's say, a year from now or 2 years from now?
Well, I think, by the next year, you're hoping, at some point towards the end of his rookie year or into year 2, you're hoping he's a solid starter. At the end of his rookie contract, you're hoping that he's at least in the Pro Bowl conversation. And I think that's possible for him. Again, he's only 20 years old, still young, still figuring out how to use his body, his power. But he, just from last year, watched his 2019 film to his 2020 film, and there wasn't a lot of 2020 film because of the pandemic, and then he was also injured. But you could just, in the limited sample size that we have, you see a much better player in terms of hit that inline power with his hands, the way he's able to latch and drive. So you see a player that's getting better and better, and it's always the tough part about evaluation when you talk about potential and upside, and basically, you're getting out your crystal ball and trying to guess where he's going to be with some pro coaching and with further development. But the trajectory that he's at right now, you see him by year 2 competing for a starting job, and then hopefully by the end of his rookie contract, he's in that conversation to be an above-average starter, a guy that's at least going to be in the conversation for a Pro Bowl berth.
Another player in that 23-34 range, Creed Humphrey out of Oklahoma, who has a decorated resume. He's played center for the Sooners, but do you think that he could play all 3 interior positions at the pro level?
He did at the Senior Bowl during practice, and he held his own. So I think that is certainly a fair projection. I think he's best at center, though. He's my top-ranked center in the class. Didn't allow a sack in 37 starts at center for Oklahoma. Strength, smarts. He tested much better than expected at his pro day. 5.08 40-yard dash, 7.50 3-cone. I don't know that we always see that on the field, but he's not a deficient athlete by any means. And above all, I think why you love him is he's a technician. That's why it's so easy to appreciate his game, and why you'd love to see him in your uniform. Reaction quickness, play strength. He's a former wrestler, all-state wrestler in high school. You see that on the field. The intangibles are off the charts. The coaches rave about him. So the fact that you could probably kick him outside to guard as well, like he did the Senior Bowl, just another bullet to add to his resume as something that's really impressive about him. So he's an easy sell to make in a war room for a team that's looking for a starting center.
And is 23 too early for Creed Humphrey, or you think that's a legitimate possibility that he could, in theory, go somewhere between 23 and 34, which is when the Jets would then next be on the clock?
If you grade Creed Humphrey as a starter in the NFL who could be an above-average starter in the NFL at center, a position that is of huge importance, especially for a team that could be breaking in a rookie quarterback, I don't know that 23 is too early. You look at mock drafts out there, and you talk to people, he's a mid-second round pick, this and that. It might look like a reach when you do it that way, but when you just boil it down to, okay, what do we need? What does he give us? And does he make us a better football team? I don't think that he necessarily qualifies for a reach. I think you also have to look at, what's the gap between him and the next center in this class for each team. Because if you think there's a big gap, then maybe you don't want to risk losing him in the early second round. So the draft's all about value. You want to maximize each selection. So, I think that early second round's probably more of the sweet spot for Creed Humphrey. But, I'm not going to look at a team that drafts him in the top 30 and say they reached necessarily, because it might fit exactly what they're looking for at a position that doesn't get enough attention as how important it is for each offense.
So the Jets have 2 third-round picks. Give us 2 interior offensive linemen that you think could make sense for the Jets.
Well, we just stay on the center conversation. Quinn Miners, who's my number 2 center in this draft. We touched on him before, but anytime we get to talk about Division III player, let's do it again. 2-year starting guard at Division III Wisconsin Whitewater. He was a borderline draft pick based off his junior film. Didn't have a 2020 season. Goes to the Senior Bowl and just dominates at center. I think he's going to be drafted somewhere in the top 70 picks. So you look at the Jets sitting there in that early third round, that could be a possible landing spot for him. 6'3", 320 pounds, 33-inch arms, really athletic player. Love the mentality, love the competitive drive, technique, the power, all above average. And without a 2020 season, he spent the year with coaches and trainers getting his body right, getting his technique right. And really, did it show in Mobile? Just really impressive player who has helped himself more than anybody throughout this draft process. So, he might make it to the early third round. But if he does, I think he's someone that should be on the radar for the Jets. And then, you look at later in the third round, let's look at a guard, Trey Smith from Tennessee. A little bit of an enigma as a prospect because he's rare in terms of size, power, movement ability. 6'5.5", 321 pounds, posted outstanding numbers in the agility drills at his pro day, 32 reps on the bench. But the senior tape was very up and down. For a player with that raw power, you expect to see displacement, point of attack movement, and you just don't see it on a consistent basis from him. High risk, high reward player because the talent is undeniable. Scouts thought he could go in the first round with a strong senior year. It just didn't happen. And he's overcome a lot in his life, including blood clots in his lungs. The character feedback has been outstanding with him. Just a really interesting player who could be maybe in play at that pick number 86 for the Jets.
So it feels like Miners' stock is going up. Trey Smith kind of going down, where you think about where he was at least at the beginning of his collegiate career. In terms of Miners, we've talked about how much he's risen in this draft process from the Senior Bowl to now. But, is it a little worrisome that when you look at his tape, it's not nearly the player that it was for 1 week in Mobile, and then those numbers were confirmed in shorts and a T-shirt at his pro day?
That's fair. And that's the exact question that GMs will be asking their scouts in the war room when they figure out, okay, where do we stack this kid on our board? And it's a unique situation because you're talking about a D3 player. And not only a D3 player, but, no disrespect to D3 programs, they just don't have the same strength and conditioning programs, the dietitians. And, Quinn Miners is a guy that after football season, he would go on his own and work out on his own. And, he would put on some weight, lose some weight, and then come back for football season and get back in shape. So, this is a guy who you get him in a program, a year-round program, and all of a sudden things might look a little bit different. But I think it's interesting how you mentioned it, how you phrased it. These two players, Quinn Miners, Trey Smith, a juxtaposition in terms of the different way they're going. Trey Smith is a 5-star guy, big-time recruit, goes to Tennessee. Everybody wanted him. And his career has kind of gone the other way, where with Miners, he couldn't get anybody to look at him. Goes to Division III that doesn't have athletic scholarships. And all of a sudden, he's on the upswing. He's ascending. So just a very, two different paths. It's very interesting to track their careers going into the NFL.
One thing on Trey Smith before we move in to a day 3 guy. Well, it's a 2-part question. 1, the medical. You mentioned the blood clots. How worrisome is that? And 2, if Trey Smith, let's say, were drafted by the Jets and he emerged as the player that you saw early with Tennessee, to pair him with Mekhi Becton. I mean, what kind of a left side are we thinking about there?
Oh goodness, yeah, that would be fun to watch. I mean, two humongous human beings, just bouncing bodies all over the field. Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. There's no question. The durability stuff, the injury background, it's especially this year where teams aren't able to necessarily get their doctors with these guys. You're going based off of medical reports and things that other doctors are saying, and so it could be that's part of the reason why he's high risk, high reward. He's overcome a lot, and he deserves a lot of credit for the way he battled through everything, faced that adversity. But in terms of the long term, different teams are going to look at it just a little bit differently. Some teams are more risk adverse, some not as much, and so it'll be different from team to team how they view all this medical information. Most notably, Trey Smith with his background.
All right, let's wrap up the interior of the offensive line with a day 3 prospect that you think maybe deserves a little more attention.
Go with Royce Newman out of Ole Miss. He's one of those picks who he's not going to get talked about much on TV when he gets drafted. The TV networks, they're going to be talking about that flashy receiver who is 2 picks ahead of him. Meanwhile, Newman is just going to show up, provide immediate depth for a team, and he's going to play for the next 10 years as a mid-round pick. 6'5", 310 pounds, good length. He's always on time, which is what you love about him. Eyes, feet, movements, all on schedule. Not the most powerful guy, but he doesn't need to be, because when his angles are on point, his body position, he's able to keep the pocket clean, seal run lanes, and maybe the best selling point for him with scouts, 4-position versatility. They say he can play center, right tackle, and either guard spot. So if you're looking for that offensive line depth prospect, Newman is the type of player that I'd be targeting somewhere early on day 3.
Does Newman have potential starting upside, or is this a guy that you think mainly serves in a starting role in a pinch, like if someone were hurt?
I think initially that's where he's going to start, as a depth piece who can fill in when needed. But he's also one of those guys where you give him a taste of that starting job, he might not give it back. Depending on how he plays. So, I don't think he's played his best football yet. And, with some added coaching at the NFL level, would not surprise me at all if he eventually gets his chance to start and then just the coaches decide he's one of our 5 best and we can't take him out. So I think it's certainly possible.
So out of all the guys that we've talked about so far, Alijah Vera-Tucker, Jalen Mayfield, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, Quinn Miners, and now Royce Newman, with the Jets running an outside zone scheme, you figured it'd be important that they could move in space. When I say that, do all of these guys move well in space, or is there a couple guys that you think, these guys would actually fit really well compared to a couple of these other guys?
All of these guys that we've talked about move well. None of these guys are slugs. Even a Trey Smith, who's just a mammoth human being at 6'5.5", 320 pounds, his agility drills were really impressive. So he moves really well. Jalen Mayfield, even though I think because some of his slide quickness isn't as efficient, he might move inside as his kind of the best route for him long term. He's still a good athlete for almost 330 pounds. Miners and Humphrey, both above average athletes at the center position. So I think all 6 of these guys that we've talked about would fit what the Jets are looking to do.
And then these are the guys that we focused on, but how would you grade this group of interior linemen, or even guys like Mayfield who play tackle but could play inside, or you project to play inside at the next level? How would you grade this group as a whole in terms of depth?
You could make the case it's a top 5 position in this class in terms of talent at the top, talent on day 2, and then talent on day 3. I think if we're going to stack it, it starts with probably quarterback, just because we're going to have 5 likely go in the top 10 to 12 picks, which is rare. So I get to start with quarterback. Wide receiver and corner are there, and then offensive tackle and interior offensive line. I think those are your 5 positions this year that stand above in terms of talent at the top, and then also depth throughout days 1, days 2, and day 3.
All right. Well, with that being said, let's head to some fan questions. Let's head to Sean, who presents this scenario. Alijah Vera-Tucker or J.C. Horn at 23. Regardless if you think this is totally not feasible or this is not going to happen, let's just say for the sake of this argument, both are available on the clock at 23. If you're Joe Douglas saying, are you going Alijah Vera-Tucker or J.C. Horn?
I mean, that would be a great problem to have, deciding between those two players, for Joe Douglas. And I would lean towards the corner just because they're graded very similar for me. I think actually they're 13 and 14 on my top 100 board, I believe, so very closely. But I would lean towards the corner just because I think it's a position that you could argue is a greater need. But also, I think it's also tougher to find those high-end corners like a J.C. Horn who has the athletic ability. He has the size, the aggressiveness, the instincts, the ball awareness. So there's a lot that he offers that I want at corner, where I feel comfortable finding a guard later on in the draft, where I don't feel as comfortable finding a corner who can come anywhere close to J.C. Horn. So I would lean towards Horn in that scenario. If he falls to if either of those two fall to 23, Joe Douglas is doing backflips in that war room.
And I think Jets fans would be doing backflips as well. So Jersey Jet comes in with the second question. What linebacker or linebackers are the Jets most likely to pluck from this class? Do you anticipate more than one being chosen by the Jets? And I will say that when we discussed the linebackers, we discussed, all the way from Micah Parsons up top to a day 3 player and Tony Fields. Maybe avoid the first round for this answer. I mean, you mentioned Nick Bolton, potential fit for the Jets. Like, who's a guy that you think that the Jets, that fits what they need in terms of speed and maybe plays better backwards than he does forwards?
Well, let's focus on that part then. Guys that maybe play better in reverse, guys you can trust in coverage. And two linebackers, I think immediately stick out in that second, third round range, maybe even early fourth. Jabril Cox from LSU and then Pete Werner, Ohio State, both 6'3", 235 range. Jabril Cox, North Dakota State transfer, goes to LSU for his senior year. Does not look out of place at all. One of the better coverage linebackers this year. There's some questions about his run fits and his ability to take on blocks, things like that. But he's a guy that can play in space. And that's always a guy that you're going to, there's a premium placed on a player like that. And then Pete Werner, another guy who I think has 4-down potential, all 3 downs and then special teams. His ability to play off the ball, to play against the slot, to cover tight ends and backs. He has the athletic traits, and I think he also has the ball awareness. And so Werner, a guy in that late 3rd, early 4th round range, who could be a target as well. So Cox and Werner, if you're looking for a linebacker who can play in space, you can trust them in coverage. Those two guys make a lot of sense.
We didn't talk about this guy when we hit the linebackers, just in a couple sentences. What are your thoughts on Jamin Davis and where he could, in theory, be selected?
Jamin Davis reminds me a lot of Zach Cunningham when he was coming out of Vanderbilt. Long athlete with some explosion to him. He's a good zone dropper, so he can find his landmarks, find the football, and make plays. I mean, just watch the Tennessee tape. He had a 70-yard interception return for a touchdown on that one. That's what you're going to bet on. He has a lot of the traits you're looking for. And because of that, I think he has a good chance to go in the first round. So, he's a player that we could be talking about as an option in the back half of round 1 for a team like the Jets, if they're looking for a linebacker who can do a little bit of everything, a guy that you can plug him in, don't have to worry about him. I graded him as an early 2nd round pick, but there's some first round love for Jamin Davis out there.
All right, let's wrap up the fan questions with Jet Life Cruise. Football is a game of 3 phases, and we're going to hit the 3rd phase right here. He wants to know, can we get a good kicker in the draft? So with that being said, Dane, who is your top kicker?
Well, my top kicker is Evan McPherson out of Florida. A junior, came out early, big leg. There's a lot to like about him. I think there's going to be 2 kickers drafted, probably. McPherson and then Miami's kicker, Jose, I'm going to butcher his last name, but Borregales, I believe is how you say it. Both those kickers have some love around the league. Possible draftable grades later on in the draft. So 5th, 6th, 7th rounds. I think there's a good chance we can see both those guys come off the board. Two Florida guys with a Gator and a Hurricane.
All right, last question. This is back to the offensive line. It just came to my mind. We're talking about Trey Smith. We're talking about Quinn Miners. We're talking about their trajectories, their question marks. What do you think their floors are in the NFL?
With Trey Smith?
And Quinn Miners, both of those guys, because there are obviously questions with both of them. I mean, with Alijah Vera-Tucker, Jalen Mayfield, we discussed it, and Creed Humphrey, I feel like a lot of people have a good sense of them. But let's say Trey Smith and Quinn Miners don't hit their ceilings. Like, what is their floor in the NFL?
I think Smith has a little bit lower floor, because like I said, his senior tape, there's some sloppy elements to it that worry you. And because of the medical background, obviously that's why he's more of a high risk, high reward type of guy. I think his floor is a little bit lower. With Miners, it's weird because he's a D3 guy, hasn't faced a lot of top competition, but I think there's a level of transparency with him because the competitiveness, the toughness, the movements, what he showed at the Senior Bowl, I've seen that he can do it. And that's, I think, what I've learned most talking to GMs around the league and different talent evaluators. If you've seen a guy do it, even if it's, even a 3-day stretch like Quinn Miners, he can do it play after play after play. You've seen him do it. Where with Trey Smith, it's a little more sporadic. But with a guy like Quinn Miners, the fact that I've seen him do it, I think shows me that he has it in his muscle memory. He has it in his mental process where he can do it consistently at the NFL level. It might take a little bit of time. So I think Miners actually has a higher floor than Trey Smith, which sounds weird, talking about a D3 player compared to an SEC player, former 5-star. But I would say Miners has the higher floor between the two players.
And that is the way the cookie crumbles, and that is all we have here on NFL Draft Preview, presented by Verizon with the Athletics' Dane Brugler. Dane, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you about the Beast next week after it comes out.
Can't wait. Thanks, Ethan.